Welcome everybody to the next in the series of Talking Local Government with myself, Gareth Broderick. And look, today I'm delighted to welcome Warwick Winn, General Manager of Penrith City Council. Prior to Penrith, Warwick spent some time in Victoria as Chief Executive Officer of Manningham City Council. And prior to that, North Sydney Council for an extended period of time, of which part of that was General Manager. So Warwick, welcome to Talking Local Government.
Thank you very much.
Warwick, you have potentially an interesting background in that you've held both leadership positions in New South Wales twice now, but also obviously Manningham City Council in Victoria. So I'm really interested to find out, from your experience, what were the main differences, indeed, if any, between operating at that senior level in Victoria as opposed to New South Wales?
Yeah, okay. I'll try to keep it sweet and short. Because I've worked in the United Kingdom and in New Zealand, I've always been bemused by the differences within Australia, and there's quite significant differences between New South Wales and Victoria. I took it with a grain of salt when people said to me that working in local government becomes more civilised the further south you go. And having never had the joys of working in Queensland, I only had New South Wales the yardstick. But surprisingly, there are some significant differences. And I found my time in Victoria really enjoyable. It actually revigorated me in terms of my belief in local government, local governance and how it can work. I've got a lot of time for the way things have been done in Victoria, and there's a number of specifics, I think, that sort of feed into that. And I guess the first thing is that local government in New South Wales, there is quite a combative edge to it. And that's not only within the organisations between the councillors and general managers and senior staff and staff, but also between the councils. It's quite competitive, and our relationship with the state government here at best is frosty and normally pretty indifferent, so much so that we're almost at daggers drawn. It just is a reality. We spend a lot of time scrapping with the state government, and the state government spend a lot of time ignoring local government. There's efforts to try to make that better. We're part of a city deal group of councils here in Penrith. We've got this new airport being built, so it's absolutely flat stick. But for me, the difference in Victoria was more collegiate. There was so much more respect from the elected council to me as the chief exec. Really, as a general manager in New South Wales, you take a bit of a back step, whereas I was always amused and slightly horrified when I was expected to open events and talk and introduce the council as opposed to the mayor doing that. And also very amused when I was in photo shops and those types of things, where here very much the politicians do that and the GMs don't. They're in the background. As I said before, I think it's less combative in Victoria, and certainly where I was in Manningham and in the eastern part of Melbourne, the relationship between the councils was fantastic. And, we managed to work together on all sorts of projects in a way that I hadn't. It was a lot different in terms of the way that it happens here in New South Wales. I think there's a more professional edge to the way things are run in Victoria, and I can't put my finger on why that is. But I think that the councils have a better understanding of their roles, perhaps, but also the relationship between the state government and local government through the Victorian Office of Local Government, having people like Graham and Emerson involved in that state level meant there was a connectivity between our realities of local government and that in the state government. So again, on a couple of occasions, having the Northeastern Freeway built through Manningham, and I was again bemused and amazed when I think it was Duncan Elliott, or I think he was the chief executive of the group looking after the freeway, actually came out and started talking to us without having to be prompted or begged to come out. And it was just a much more professional and productive approach. So, yeah, I really I enjoyed my time in Victoria, and if I'm fortunate enough, I wouldn't mind going back and having another go down there.
Okay, look, I'm going to go straight after that piece. You spoke about the combative nature, particularly, well, not particularly, but with state government and local government. Why do you think that exists?
Oh, look, I think it's about perspective, and I think a lot of the people in the state government, if there was more senior staff and middle-ranking staff moving between the two tiers, I think that would diminish. And I think that's one of the positive things in Victoria. You have some of that movement. We don't really have that here in New South Wales. I know some people that move into the state, but they're very few and far between. It's all about communication and putting yourself in someone else's shoes. And I guess I've got 15 councillors for my sins here at Penrith, and that's like dealing with 15 ministers. Each one has their own issues and their own opinions, and you have to manage and work within that. I think sometimes the state, because they're reporting to a single minister, it becomes a little bit more focused, and they don't necessarily understand the consultation exercises and the challenges in local government we have to go through on the consultation front of it. I think that's just a real gap in the understanding. But for me, it's getting people to empathise with each other's challenges and then trying to help each other overcome those challenges. And I just think, again, in Victoria, there seemed to be more understanding of some of that. And the role of the Office of Local Government in New South Wales, to be fair to them, I think, they're under-resourced. They've been moved from pillar to post in terms of where their reporting lines are. And in Victoria, I just had a feeling that the Office of Local Government there was more powerful, and it was driving a much more connected agenda that they do here in New South Wales. So quite a different culture at that state level, which then filtered down into local government as well.
Bearing all that in mind, if you had access to any particular levers, whether they be, legislative, or other, and you were to do one thing, what one thing would you try and do to improve the relationship between local government at that local level and state level? You said communication, but that's quite a broad.
I think one of the simpler things they could do is make it easier for senior staff to move from one tier to the other. And there is obviously an adaptability of skill sets. I manage 1,500 people at a $300 million operating budget and all those types of things. But those skill sets of project delivery, customer interaction, dealing with the politics, all of those different types of things, they're just as applicable on the state level. And I think if there was, but for me, this is a simple example. For me to move into the state government affects the way my super works. It affects my leave, my sick leave, and all of these types of things. Now, there's simple little things, but when I moved from New South Wales to Victoria, I had 9 months worth of sick leave built up over my illustrious and healthy career with local government. And but when I turned up, it wasn't transportable. So straight away when I turned up to Vic, if I had broken my leg or anything else had happened to me, all of that sick leave was gone. Now that becomes an issue as you become a little bit greyer and a little bit older. You've got to take some of those things. And I think if we could get rid of some of that, those barriers for movement, that barriers to mobility, it would help people exchange. And I think when that happens, you get a better perspective, a different perspective, and I would encourage that. So if I could pull one switch, and I would do this between the states as well, that when you move, you can keep your annual leave, you keep your long service leave, you keep your sick leave, you keep your superannuation. If you move from the state to the local, you keep it. And if you go from the local to the federal level, those barriers to employment mobility need to be looked at. And I would have thought that would be a simple fix.
All right. Well, that moves quite nicely into the federal space, because I also want to ask you, obviously, recent budget announcements. So looking at that budget in terms of local government, and look, whether it be Victoria or New South Wales, how do you see that budget affecting local government?
Yeah, look, obviously there's a massive spending line that's being created now for infrastructure across the country and within the states, and it comes back down to deliverability. And for me, the budget was a real shot in the arm. It provided a level of confidence into the economy. I've been arguing for a long time that things like the federal assistance grants, the FAG grants, the government issues should be they should be at a higher level, and they should be a little bit more targeted. Particularly for some of the rural councils that really rely on them, with their roads and things like that. I think the infrastructure spend, I'm interested on how it's going to be delivered. And when it comes down to improving our baseload infrastructure to enable growth in the future, a lot of that baseload is going to be carried by local government. Big highways, shore, railroads, airports like we've got here in Western Sydney. But there's also a lot of, the bridges and the roads and the footpaths and the water and the sewerage. All of those types of infrastructure issues have to be dealt with as well. So, yes, there's a lot of money sloshing around, but again, it's how it gets properly spent and properly allocated out. I think it's got to be a real challenge. But, hats off to the government. They have, the Leopard has changed its spots. They have engaged in a little bit more of a Keynesian exercise in terms of pump priming. It's just making sure the money that gets allocated out now, and it's massive, is spent wisely and not wasted, and we get bang for our buck going forward. So when we do come out of this most weird of times, and let's face it, it's even weirder in Victoria than it is up here in New South Wales, we're in a position to really prosper and benefit from it. But it's helping local government with their finances helps local economies, because if we're spending money on local parks, local sporting infrastructure, we're in a rate-capped environment, just like you are in Victoria. That means we're constrained by our spending. If you open up those taps, we spend more money, we employ more local people. That's got to be good for everyone at this stage.
Well, finally, Penrith, like many of the Greater Sydney LGAs, is going through a fantastic period of growth. If you were able to fast forward 5 years, look back, what would you hope to see?
Well, some of the infrastructure work that's underway at the moment would be bloody great if that was completed, because it's driving everyone nuts. We've got highways and roads and bridges and everything all over the track with regards to the airport. So having that done, but on a more community level, it's the upgrade we're currently going through in terms of a lot of our community asset upgrade. And part of the budget approach that we're taking in our response to COVID is trying to accelerate some of that. So it'd be nice to see some of those upgrades, which the community really deserves and have been waiting for a long time. But also building on the sustainability approach as well. You'll see behind me here in that lovely graphic, that's a new park that we're building by the river. It's funded through the City Deal Livability Fund, and that's a multi-year project. It's $25 million worth of park that's going to be built, but a wonderful asset for the city. So in 5 years' time, I'd like to be able to look back and go, all that roadwork stuff is completed, that we've completed that park, which is Regatta Park. We have another park being planned in the middle of the town, City Park, which is a 7,000 square metre park, which will change the way our CBD operates. And getting some of those key infrastructure projects in terms of the amenity upgrades for our sporting fields and the like, done and dusted. And the last thing I'd like to be able to look back in 5 years and think, we've got our budgets in a good place. We've managed to weather this very difficult storm, and we've taken ourselves forward without, burning too many of our reserves. And we've helped the community weather this storm as well.
Look, Warwick, I really want to thank you for your time today, and I especially want to thank you for your frank and honest appraisal of how New South Wales and Victoria are currently set up. Have a fantastic rest of the day, and thank you once again for being with us.
A pleasure talking to you, Gareth. And I really think New South Wales has got a lot to learn from Victoria. And I guess as a Kiwi, when I say that, my New South Wales colleagues kick me. But it's hand on heart. There's a lot, the way that a lot of things are done in Victoria is really, really good.
Cheers, Warwick. Really appreciate your honesty again. Thanks so much.
Take it easy. Okay, bye.
Cheers, Warwick.